It's May 25th, 2006. The temperature is 40 degrees below zero, and the wind is slicing across the ridge at nearly 80 kilometers per hour. Somewhere just below the summit, a man lies motionless in the snow. His name is Lincoln Hall. His Sherpa team crouches beside him, shaking him, calling his name through the hiss of their oxygen masks. No answer. They've been here for hours, dragging him, lifting him, begging him to keep his eyes open. Now he isn't moving. The Sherpa checks his pulse through the glove. Nothing. Hall's skin is turning gray, and his breath has stopped fogging the air. One of them lowers his head, just for a moment, then reaches for the radio. A voice crackles through static from base camp. "Is he alive?" The reply comes, low and exhausted. "No movement. We tried everything." That message travels down the mountain in seconds. Another death on Everest. Another name to be added to the list. The Sherpas stay a moment longer, staring at the body of the man they've carried for hours. Then they stand up, look at one another, and start down the ridge. It's not betrayal. They've been in the death zone for nearly 12 hours. Their oxygen bottles are empty, and their own bodies are failing. They're barely strong enough to save themselves. The moment when a Sherpa leaves a climber behind is one of the most misunderstood realities of high-altitude climbing. For outsiders, it looks like indifference. But up here, it's different. Above 8,000 meters, you can't save anyone who can't move. The mountain doesn't allow it. The air is too thin. Every step you take is a calculation. One life or two. The Sherpa's duty has always been simple but brutal: to help, to carry, to protect. They're the quiet professionals who make other people's dreams possible. When climbers celebrate summits, they stand beside them, but rarely in front of the camera. When climbers die, it's the Sherpas who zip the bag and haul the body down. And sometimes, when the line between life and death vanishes, they have to make a choice that nobody back home will ever understand. That morning, Lincoln Hall's Sherpas made that choice, and they truly believed it was the only one they had. Lincoln Hall was one of Australia's most experienced climbers, 50 years old, calm, methodical, and widely respected. He had summited Everest before, back in 1984, and spent decades in the mountains. In 2006, he returned to Everest as part of a guided expedition on the north side. The climb began smoothly. On May 25th, just after sunrise, Hall stood again on top of the world, the highest point on Earth, 8,848 meters above sea level. His team congratulated him, snapped a few photos, and started down. For most climbers, reaching the summit isn't the end. It's the halfway mark. Most deaths happen on the way down. Hall knew that. But as he descended, something changed. He began to stumble. His pace slowed. Then came the confusion. He started mumbling, removing his gloves, loosening his mask. He told his teammates he could see things in the distance. People who weren't there. His speech slurred. He sat down and refused to move. Those are the classic signs of high-altitude cerebral edema, the brain swelling from lack of oxygen. Once it begins, the window for rescue is narrow. Without descent and oxygen, it's fatal. The Sherpas tried everything. They forced oxygen into his mask, tried to get him to stand, even tied him to the rope and pulled. But at 8,700 meters, pulling a limp body is suicide. Every meter takes more energy than you have to give. For hours, they battled upward winds and exhaustion. At some point, one of them collapsed. Another began to drift into confusion himself. When they radioed the expedition leader below, the situation was clear. There was no more oxygen. They had been trying for 10 hours. Hall was not responding. The order came back. If he is gone, you have to come down. So they did. They left him lying just below the summit ridge, the wind covering his body with snow. They zipped his jacket up over his face. No one expected anyone to survive the night up there. No one ever does. Back at camp, they broke the news. Lincoln is gone. The expedition leader radioed base camp, and base camp informed the world. It became another headline on a mountain already known for tragedy. The same season had seen the death of British climber David Sharp, whose body still sat frozen inside a small cave on the north side. People were already asking how a climber could be left behind. Now, another case, another name. As darkness settled over the ridge, Lincoln Hall's story should have ended there. But the mountain had other plans. The next morning, as the sun rose over Tibet, a small team of climbers led by American mountaineer Dan Mazur was heading toward the summit. The air was calm, the path was familiar, and then something impossible appeared in the snow ahead. A man, sitting cross-legged, without a hat or gloves, staring out into space. His face was gray and blistered. His hair was crusted with ice. At first, Mazur thought it was a corpse, one of the many that mark the route like frozen monuments. But then the figure moved, slowly. The man turned his head and smiled faintly. "Can you tell me?" he said. "Am I on the way up or down?" Mazur and his team froze. The man's voice was weak but clear. He was alive. They recognized him immediately. It was Lincoln Hall, the man reported dead the night before. Somehow he had survived the night in the open at nearly 8,700 meters without oxygen, food, or shelter. That has never happened before or since. Mazur made the only decision he could. He abandoned his summit attempt. The team dropped their packs and moved toward Hall. His jacket was unzipped. His fingers were bare. His skin was blackened with frostbite. He was delusional, alternating between laughter and silence. They gave him oxygen and hot tea, wrapped him in spare clothing, and radioed for help. Down at camp, when the call came through, "Lincoln Hall is alive." Nobody believed it at first. His Sherpas, hearing it over the radio, began to cry. They had believed for certain he was gone. The expedition leader ordered an immediate rescue. 4 Sherpas began climbing back up toward him. It took them all day. By the time they reached Mazur's group, Hall was fading fast. The Sherpas attached him to ropes and began lowering him down the slope, step by step. They had to stop often to rest. Reportedly, one slipped and nearly fell. The entire operation lasted nearly 48 hours. But they didn't quit. The mountain, which had seemed determined to claim him, finally began to let go. When they reached advanced base camp, Hall was barely conscious. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his hands frozen, but his heartbeat was steady. Against all odds, he had survived a night in the death zone. The story spread around the world as a miracle. Newspapers called it the man who came back from the dead. The climbing community couldn't believe it. Doctors couldn't explain it. There was no precedent. No one had ever spent a full night unprotected at that altitude and lived. But behind the headlines, a question hung in the air. Why had his Sherpas left him in the first place? To understand that, you have to understand what the death zone actually is. At sea level, the oxygen saturation in your blood is around 98%. Up there, it's 35%. The brain swells, the heart strains, the blood thickens. Muscles starve for oxygen. You move 10 steps and have to stop to breathe. Every minute you spend standing still, you're dying a little faster. At that height, carrying another person is almost impossible. A single climber can barely support their own weight. When you stop moving, your body temperature drops instantly. Rescue missions fail not because people stop caring, but because physics doesn't allow them to succeed. That's what the Sherpas faced that night. They had given everything they had. If they'd stayed longer, they would have died beside him. When Hall finally recovered enough to speak, he was clear about that. He told reporters that the Sherpas had made the right decision. "They thought I was dead," he said. "They didn't abandon me. They saved themselves." In the years that followed, he repeated that message again and again. He refused to let anyone turn the story into blame. He knew the truth. Up there, survival depends on impossible choices. For Sherpas, those choices come more often than the public ever hears about. They are the invisible backbone of every expedition, fixing ropes, carrying oxygen, setting up camps, guiding climbers who often have far less experience. They do it quietly, and they do it for a fraction of what the clients pay. But when things go wrong, it's the Sherpas who risk the most. In 2006, the same year Lincoln Hall lived, at least 11 other climbers didn't come back from Everest. For each of them, there were Sherpas who tried, who stayed too long, who gave their oxygen, who didn't make it home either. The mountain doesn't discriminate. For Hall, the story didn't end on the mountain. He was evacuated to Kathmandu and treated for frostbite and exhaustion. He lost several fingertips, but recovered fully. When he spoke publicly about what happened, he never made himself the hero. The real heroes, he said, were the ones who came back for him, the Sherpas who climbed back up when they didn't have to. He later wrote a book called Dead Lucky, where he described the experience in quiet, measured words. He remembered hearing voices in the night, seeing figures that weren't there, feeling both peace and confusion. He said that when he finally saw the sun rise, he thought he was dreaming. In that book, he also described the moment his Sherpas left him. He said he didn't blame them. He didn't even remember it clearly. He remembered one of them crying, another saying a prayer, then nothing. He would go on to recover, return home to Australia, and continue working as an author and motivational speaker. He passed away in 2012 from unrelated causes, but his name remains tied forever to that day in 2006, the day he died on Everest and lived again. Lincoln Hall's story will always be remembered as one of the strangest miracles on Everest. But it's also a story about what survival really costs. The Sherpas didn't let him die. They gave him the only thing they could, the chance for one more sunrise. And somehow, against every law of the mountain, he took it.